This video is going to be quite depressing. I had a look at how hard do we have to work, how much do we have to save in order not to fall behind. Because intuitively we all know this, right? The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. There's some kind of a line in the sand that separates the winners from the losers. And so in this video, I ran the actual numbers. I looked at various quintiles for different income groups. I looked at monetary expansion. I looked at asset returns, and the results are not amusing whatsoever. So the income data is from taxpolicycenter.org, and it breaks up household income data into different quintiles. It also gives us the top 5%, goes all the way to 2022 and starts in 1970. So we've got 50 years of data, and this comes originally from the US Census Bureau. Now we're going to compare the growth of those numbers with the growth of the money supply. So how much are we actually in real terms earning more over time? We are also going to compare this relative to the S&P 500. How much can you beat the system by buying stocks? And of course, we're going to answer the question, how hard do we have to work? What kind of income do we currently need in order to benefit from the system? What do we need to achieve in order for the capital long term to come to us and not go away? So here's something you might have already seen on this channel before. This is the S&P 500, very long term on a linear scale. And of course, this has its fluctuations, but over the long term, this is going up. The issue is that monetary expansion is also going up. So this is USM2. This is the money supply. This is money printer go brrr. And so in case you don't know this yet, this might be your first eye opener of this video. This is the S&P 500 divided by USM2. So how much really do we gain by investing into stocks? The answer is pretty much nothing. This is a chart that starts in 1959. And yes, we did gain a little bit, but overall, we just have our ups and downs. There is a slight caveat to this though, because the S&P 500 also pays dividends, and the dividends are not directly calculated into the S&P 500. So yes, there are dividends, but there's also fees potentially. There's also taxes potentially. So if you believe that the dividends are pretty much equal to the taxes and to the fees, then this is the return you're getting. You're getting pretty much zero purchasing power improvements, even over the span of 65 years. But let's now look at this. Let's see how fast different incomes are developing. By the way, right now, if you have the mean income in the top 2.5%, you need to make $500,000 per year. If you're average in the bottom 20%, so basically 10% are below you, 90% are above you, then you're making $16,120 per year. The mean income for the middle quintile is $74,730. So if you're earning more, then you're doing better than half of the population. If you're earning less, you're doing worse than half of the population. And so now it's interesting, over those decades of data since 1970, how fast did those different incomes rise? And yes, it's true, the largest incomes also grew the fastest. So the richer earn faster and faster, the poorer, they don't increase in their US dollar incomes as fast. So have a look at this little calculation. The first quintile, so the bottom 20%, the medium income of them in 1970 was a bit under $2,000. Now it's at the $16,000. We are looking at 52 years of data, and annualized on average, the geometric average, we are looking at a growth of 4.1%. The second quintile grew also by 4.1. The third quintile grew by 4.2. The fourth quintile by 4.5, and the fifth quintile by 5%. So the more you earned in 1970, and assuming you stayed at your relative income within the US society, the more you actually also grew annualized. The winners don't only earn the most, they also grow their income the most. Now what's the delta here between the 2.5%, right? The average of the top 5%. What's the delta between those two? We are looking at 1.24%. And let's now annualize this by 30 years. So let's say your children, one generation, will earn exactly same, relatively speaking. How much are you getting ahead when you're in the top 5% relative to the lowest quintile? You will get ahead by 44% within a generation. So the fight of rich versus poor is real. Over the decades, we do see that the surgeons and the lawyers and the software engineers of this world, they tend to be able to buy more and more, relatively speaking, to the poorest over the time. 44% roughly over the course of a generation, so 30 years. Here's the problem with crypto YouTube. People promoting becoming degen or buying 100x coins. That's what gives clicks, but that's not what's going to bring you forward. I refuse to take money from centralized exchanges. I refuse to take money from crypto projects. I refuse to pump and dump a coin and filling up my pockets in the background. I don't do any of this. Instead, I share my knowledge in the form of tutorials in the premium membership. So that's content that won't do well on YouTube, but that builds up skill over time. You can also directly contact me over there. You can directly pick my brain. Feel free to check it out. TheBitcoinStrategy.com is the link. So, okay, this is already confirming what we kind of felt already. The question is this overall capitalistic system. Who is benefiting from this? What kind of earner do you have to be in order to benefit from this? Do you have to be in the top 5%? Do you have to be in the top 20%? Is it okay to be average? Or is it maybe even harder for the top 5% that earn $500,000 per year? Is it maybe even harder for them in the next generation if they stay, relatively speaking, in that same social bracket to buy the house afterwards? How fast are asset prices growing relative to the income growth of the top 5%? How fast is income growing relative to the monetary supply? Because we've already seen that asset returns for the S&P 500 are pretty similar to monetary supply. So I had a look at this curve and I took a data point over here in 1970 and another one over here in 2022, simply to match the income developments. Now here's what we are getting. First data point, second data point, annualized 7% per annum. The money expanded by 7% per annum in that same time frame, while incomes, even of the top 5%, only grew by 5.3%. If you're telling your kids they have to become a lawyer or an investment banker or a strategy consultant or a surgeon in order to be in the top 5% of earners, in order to earn $500,000 at some point, still, relatively speaking, they are losing against the system. If you earned $33,280 in 1970, or you're earning $500,000 today and you grew by 5.3%, still the people that owned assets outgrew you. And again, this is the average of the top 5% bracket. So we're looking at least at the top 2.5%, probably higher because again, we have got positive skew in this distribution. So the less you earn, the more you're falling behind every year. But on top of that, even if you're an absolute stellar earner, you're still falling behind the people that have capital. So how much harder will it be for your son that becomes a pilot and moves up to captain status and then maybe manages parts of the whole airline? How much harder will he have it relative to our generation? So since assets expand by 7% per annum and since the top income earners only expands by 5.3%, how much more difficult does it become after one generation, after 30 years? The delta is 1.6% per annum, it's 15% per decade, and it's 38.5% per generation. So in real terms, if your son wants to buy that house and he has same kinds of income, top 5% income, $500,000 per year income, then still that house will feel way more expensive. It will feel as expensive as if I would now reduce your income by almost 40%. Life is getting tougher and tougher. Some of the pressure gets alleviated by being a top performer, but unfortunately not all of the pressure, unless you're maybe in the top 1% or top 0.5%, but what are the odds really? Who's going to be an income millionaire? So who's going to make more than $1 million per year consistently? So there's two potential outcomes here, right? The first outcome is that the system at some point will break. However that looks like, I have no idea. The second possibility is that your children simply just have it harder and that the only way to escape this is to have a lot of money that makes passive income. Now, I haven't yet run the numbers how much capital is needed in order to offset this pressure from the system, but it's probably several millions, right? We have to look at how much are we losing every year in purchasing power versus how much are we gaining by being invested and potentially outperform those 7% per annum expansion. Again, outperforming isn't that easy, right? The S&P 500 didn't really outperform, but the Nasdaq 100, for example, did. So I'm planning to make that calculation as well. who are really the winners here. It's not necessarily the top earners. It's the people that have a lot of capital. The question is how much capital. I will calculate this. If you're interested in that video, feel free to subscribe. I publish videos regularly. A like would be very much appreciated as well. It helps the channel grow. We are all trying to beat the system. I try to do this via crypto, and there is a Telegram channel. Feel free to join as well in case you're interested in crypto as well. See you over there. Cheers.